want to take bets on how many coughs I'm going to have to edit out of this video. Hi everybody, it's Jade and I am still unwell. I feel like I have been ill in different ways since like September of last year, and I'm so sick and tired of being unwell. But that's beside the point. That's not what this video is about. I just wanted to have a little bit of a rant to start with. Anyway, it is now February, so I thought I would do my first wrap-up of 2023 and tell you about all the books I read in January. So in the month of January I read 6 books. We'll go with, go back to the old way of doing things, where I'll talk about the audiobooks I read and then the physical books. So the first audiobook I listened to was called Losing Earth, A Recent History by Nathaniel Rich, and this was my popular science book for my... I can't remember what the actual challenge is, but my genre challenge, which is... what's it actually called? The Storygraph Genre Challenge, yes. So the popular science book basically means scientific content which is aimed at a general audience rather than scientists. So I gave this a 3 stars. Did I rate it? I'm going between my apps. Yes, I gave it 3 stars. It was a good book, well written. As someone who, I wrote my master's dissertation on the effects of climate change on certain plant species, so I know a lot about climate science and climate change, so none of it was particularly new to me. I sort of knew that going in. What did kind of surprise me, but not really that much, was the fact that the Losing Earth specifically chronicles a period of time between early 70s to like the end of the 80s. And mostly focuses on how the American government and various American corporations and stuff actively fought to like make climate change seem not that big of a deal, if they even acknowledged that it was a thing. So it was less a book about climate change and more a book about how capitalism is the main cause of climate change and how governments have actively sought to make the world worse by refusing to make any kind of concrete laws or regulations that would help reduce climate change. And then there is a section in it which I knew about ExxonMobil's fight to basically disprove climate change, because they realised that they're one of the main reasons why climate change is such a big thing. But it was a book that made me angry. Again, I sort of knew it would going into it because of just how belligerently anti regulation and stuff like that the American government very specifically is, especially in the Reagan administration. And that is a whole other rant that I could go into, which I'm not going to. So I gave it 3 stars, mostly because it just didn't tell me anything new, but I kind of anticipated that going in. The second audiobook I listened to in the month of January was The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Leftieri. This was a book that I picked for my Storygraph Reads the World challenge. This was my Syrian book. Again, I gave it 3 stars. It was just a bit of a book. I think for some there seems to have been a big uptick in books like this recently. Not necessarily Syrian ones, actually. I think the trend almost started with the Tattooist of Auschwitz, and then we have a bunch of other ones where we have The Librarian of Auschwitz, this of Auschwitz, this of this place. And The Beekeeper of Aleppo felt very similar to that, apart from the fact that it's not a true story. I mean, obviously what is happening in Syria is true, and it was very accurate to that. But The Beekeeper of Aleppo is the story of, I've forgotten the main character's name, Nuri, yes, who escaped Syria during, I was going to say during the atrocities, like it's in past tense, like it's not still happening, but he escapes Syria with his wife, who was blinded in a bombing attack in Syria, and has made his way, or they have made their way to England. And it's kind of, it chops and changes in terms of you, like time periods, so you're with Nuri whilst they're trying to settle and seek asylum, and he's talking about how difficult it is to live in England and stuff like that, mixed with their time in Syria back before the war started, where he was a beekeeper, through the war happening and them deciding to leave, and also the story of them escaping Syria and going through various countries to end up in England. It wasn't a bad book in any way, it was just, like I said, it's just one that I feel like I've read before. And this whole trend of, I don't know if it's capitalising on atrocities, but it's, in my head, it's very similar to the trend of Lifetime / documentary movies we're getting about like serial killers and stuff, which do less for bringing awareness of what is going on and more to just glorify what has happened in like a dramatic way. That was a weird connection for me to make, but anyway. On to the physical books. I always feel like I'm talking really fast when I do these things, and then I go to editing and I'm like, no, it's actually still quite a long video. But that's an aside. The first physical book that I read in January was the book club pick for January, and that is Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. This is a witch book set in the 1920s on a little island off the coast of Yorkshire. And the island is very similar to West Egg in The Great Gatsby, in that it's like full of millionaires and everything. And that, when we had our discussion for this, that was the main, because some of the people in my book club are from the north and from Yorkshire and stuff, and they're like, that was one of the biggest things that just threw them out of the immersion straight away, is having this super rich, ritzy island off the coast of Yorkshire in the 1920s. But this was another 3-star book. I enjoyed quite a lot of the dark, sort of like blood magic aspect of this. I know some people in my book club really didn't. A couple of characters really, really annoyed me, and I don't know if they were supposed to or not. There is a character, is it Beatrice? Yes. Who, in my opinion, was the villain of the piece. And that's only because I despise everything she stood for and everything she was. Because she, and the thing is, I have no issue reading books with unsympathetic characters, as long as there is either a growth phase for them where they become better people, or if the book is a bit like The Secret History, where you're not supposed to like any of the main characters, they are all very horrible people. But I feel like I was supposed to give a shit about her, and I didn't, because almost everything that went wrong in her life was her own fault, and some of the things she did were atrocious. Like, the main catalyst is a character, Annie, who was Beatrice's best friend growing up, goes to Crow Island to settle her father's estate because he's died. She was estranged from her father, she never really knew him, but he's left her everything, and he was quite wealthy. And whilst she is there, she decides she's going to meet up with Beatrice, who disappeared off to Crow Island like a year or so ago. And she finds out that Beatrice got sort of like involved with this little house of witches that's right next to Annie's little cottage that she's rented. And Annie also becomes friends with these witches, and the one character that I loved in this, Nathan. Oh, Nathan. I was just about to give away a major spoiler, but anyway. Where was I going with that? Anyway, yes, she requests, Beatrice had requested like a love potion for this man that she's become obsessed with. And that sets off a whole series of unfortunate bad events. And then at the end of it, like, all of this awful stuff has happened to Beatrice, to people she loves. She's like at some point she gets like angry with Annie and tells her off and stuff, and I'm like, how dare you? All of this is your fault. I feel no sympathy for anything that is happening to you because it is all your fault. And then even at the end of it, you go through all of this, and then, spoiler alert, she just basically goes, yeah, no, I'd still do it all again. She has like no remorse whatsoever, and I feel like I'm supposed to be sympathetic towards her, and I'm really not. So I feel like she mostly soured my perception of this book, I guess. It was well written, and I enjoyed it, and I liked the magical aspect. I feel like it was very slow. It was very slow and then very fast. Like, I'd say a good 80% of this book is build up, and then everything finishes and gets resolved in the last like 20 pages. So that was just badly structured, I think. But I did like the whole 1920s shiny aspect to it mixed with the dark magic. The next book I read was actually the first 5-star of the year. I had 2 5-stars this month, which is a nice start, considering that I felt like last year I had a bit of a year. But so the next book I read was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. I can always tell that I love a book if there is a very specific feeling I have when I've finished it, where it's almost like I'll close the book and then I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself now. It's a mark of a great book for me, and I've had that with Lord of the Rings, I had that with The Starless Sea, I had that with A Little Life, and I had it with this, which is surprising considering how short it is, actually. But Red at the Bone is more of a character study than a coherent story, I'd say. It's like each chapter follows a different person, and it's all centered around this, like, what seems to be basically a debutante, like, presenting into society ball for this main character, Melody. And so you start with her sort of coming downstairs in her grandparents' house to be presented into society, and from there you then get backstory for her, like you get a chapter from like her mother's perspective, her father's perspective, her grandmother, grandfather, Melody, and a couple, like you get them a couple of times in different chapters, but it's all sort of things that have happened in their lives that then culminated in this one thing, like this one event, and it was just like, the thing is, it's not even like it was lovely, because some of the things that happened were awful. Like, you go all the way back to the Tulsa race riots, where Melody's grandmother had to leave Tulsa because her parents' like place of business was burnt down during these race riots. And you have Melody's mother, who never got her own presenting day because she was pregnant with Melody at the age of 15, and you get presented at 16. You can't do that when you're pregnant. And like their sort of tenuous relationship, because Melody's mother never wanted to be a mother, but she also didn't want to get rid of her baby, so she basically carried Melody, gave birth to her, handed her off to her dad, and then was like, right, I'm going to university because fuck that. And like, it's just, considering there's no, it's hard to describe because there's not a lot of plot, there's just a lot of character, and I loved the way the characters were written, how real it felt, and it's just a beautifully written book. And you get, it's odd in that each chapter is written in a slightly different style, so you get some chapters that are written, I was about to say normally, and then you have other ones that are written like a poem or a song, and then you have ones that are almost entirely dialogue. You have a chapter that's completely stream of consciousness, and it was just a lovely read. It was a lovely read with not a darker undertone, but there was a difficulty through it, because all of these people have had difficult things happening in their life, apart really from Melody, who is a 16-year-old girl whose main thing is the fact that she's never had sex. So she was not, but she was also not really the focal point. Her mother was. And I don't know, it had an atmosphere to it that I really enjoyed. The next book I read was my South African pick for the Storygraph Reads the World Challenge, and an autobiography from a person you don't know that much about for my Storygraph Genre Challenge, and that was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I haven't rated this because unless I adore a autobiography, I don't tend to rate them because I find it really hard to rate someone's life. You know what I mean? But I didn't love this, mostly because I was a bit bored through most of it. There were a lot of interesting stories and anecdotes, but they were all centred about the fact that he was born as a mixed race child in the middle of apartheid in South Africa, which is like a thing that happened to him, so that's not something that I can say like it wasn't that interesting, and it is an interesting aspect, but the fact that every single story was about that, it became a bit repetitive, and then there were a few bits in it that just, I don't know, felt a bit callous to me. And then I felt bad for feeling that way, and it was just, I don't know, it was just, it's just a not particularly stellar autobiography. It's just a very middle of the road autobiography in my opinion. Like, I've read quite a few autobiographies now, and this one just didn't stand out particularly. And the last book I read in January, and another 5-star, and I absolutely adored this. I read this whilst I was on holiday, and that is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. And, like, the thing is, like, I'm surprised I loved it as much as I did because I went in waiting to be eviscerated the way I was when I read A Little Life. And I wasn't. Because this book is hilarious. The writing style is, like, I was properly laughing out loud so often in this book, and then there were other times when I was frustrated, and the bit right the last couple of chapters were like, not the last couple, the last chapter got me, like the last sort of line got me a bit actually, but in a warm fuzzies kind of way. So this is mostly the story of Cyril. You do have 1-2 chapters of Cyril's mother's perspective. This is another teen pregnancy book where Cyril's mother, Catherine, falls pregnant at 16 and is ostracised from her little Irish community, and so she heads off to Dublin because she's been kicked out of her house. Like, she's in church, she gets dragged for filth by the priest, and then she goes home and finds her bags packed and she has to leave. And so she then gives her baby up for adoption, and her baby is Cyril, who was raised by the weirdest parents, who basically adopted him because they were like, maybe that's the thing we should do, maybe we should adopt a child, and then they treat him as both just a curiosity and as just another, like, adult almost that lives in their house. Like, there's no familial warmth between any of them, but it's not in a traumatized, like, I think he was a bit traumatized by it, but it's written in the funniest way. His dad is so weird, and so is his mum actually, and it's pretty much, it's a story of Cyril's life growing up as a gay man from the 1950s up until the end of his life in like 2015, I think. Because it ends where it ends in the year that Ireland granted marriage equality. It's also the year that Cyril dies in this. I don't know if that's a spoiler because it's literally his life, so it ends when he does. But yeah, it's a story of, which is why I think I was expecting it to be really hard to read, because it was a sad life. But John Boy writes it in such a funny way. Like, there are times when you're like, okay, Cyril, you're not helping yourself here. Like, you're a bit of a coward and a little bit callous, but also you have people in your life that, like, most of his conflicts revolve around him being gay, and so when it comes out that he is gay to people, and they're like, well, you should have just told us, and I'm like, he should have just told you in a country where he was very likely to be beaten to death just for voicing the fact that he likes guys. And yet you have the gall to basically be affronted about the fact that he didn't tell you. Like, that happened multiple times with multiple different people in this, and I was annoyed every single time it happened, and I was like, but the thing is, I know that there are people that do react that way. They ignore the difficulties of what it would be like to be that kind, like, to be a LGBT person in a place where that is not accepted at all, because it's hard enough in a place where it is accepted. And they ignore all that, and they basically go, well, you lied to me, and therefore I have every right to be more angry with you. But I loved it. It was like, I keep saying, it was so funny. Each character is so real and so hilarious, and there is a beautiful love story intermixed in this that ends really tragically, but yeah, I don't know what else to say that wouldn't spoil it, other than the fact that, yeah, you are following this one man through his slightly weird and quite sad life. But I'm not upset during any of it. I apologise if the camera's in a slightly different position, but the battery died. Like, right at the end of the video, so we got through most of it. But where was I? Oh yeah. So, those were all the books that I read in January. What were your thoughts? If you've read any of those that I read, did you agree with me? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Based on the ones that I read and enjoyed, are there any that you would recommend for me to add to my massive TBR list? What books did you read in January? I always enjoy hearing other people's opinions on things. If you like this video, maybe consider giving it a thumbs up, and maybe subscribing if you want to see more videos from me in the future. And as always, be kind to yourself and be kind to others, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.